It is officially draft week as we are just a couple days away from the 2024 NFL Draft. My name is Jonathan Miller, host of the All Things Titans podcast. Appreciate you guys for stopping in today because we got an exciting one. It's Mock Draft Monday, which we haven't done much of this year and probably won't do much of in future years too, because I'm just not very big on doing multiple mock drafts. Personally, I just like to get as much information as I can, like really involve myself in the process, do a bunch of tape watching, get a bunch of opinions from different folks, and try to just be a melting pot of everything that's happening throughout this process, and then deliver what I think is as accurate of a mock draft as possible, not only for my team, but I'll also do a full first round mock draft, which will come probably in the days to come prior to the draft. So stay tuned for that. But today we are talking about a full seven round mock draft for the Tennessee Titans, with trades included. We got a trade at the top, which is really interesting that I think you guys will enjoy, but I'm going to talk strategy throughout this as well. Obviously, the first 6 picks of this draft are going to heavily inform what the Tennessee Titans can or should do, whether that's stick and pick a player they really love or trade down and try to acquire more assets. So we'll talk through all of that as we jump right into this 7-round mock draft. And here we have it. The gentleman on the graphic, as you can see here, with the trade at the top for 7th overall is Olumuyiwa Fashanu. I messed it up because I tried to say his whole name. It's Olu Fashanu, left tackle from Penn State, a guy who has been highly regarded as left tackle 2, right behind Joe Alt in this one. And as you guys can see, the full 7 rounds, the Titans were able to make a trade that acquires a couple of more picks. Also notably getting a 3rd round pick back next year, essentially making L'Jarius Sneed free, which is chef's kiss. So let's take a look here at the top. So we have the Titans trading with the Denver Broncos, the 12th overall pick, which is the Denver's 1st round pick, and the 7th overall from Tennessee being a 1st round swap. And then Denver also sending this year's 3rd round pick, this year's 4th round pick, and a 3rd round pick next year. Now, the Titans will also send them a 7th round pick just to kind of sprinkle on a little bit of value. As you know, these trades come together and GMs are talking, they have value calculators that they use basically to determine like what's fair. And I think for the Titans, sending them a little something is, kind of just made the trade go through in my eyes, but we'll see. I think that's fair compensation for the Titans as well. Now let's talk about what these first 6 picks were and what I think these first 6 picks are going to be, which is what led me to, as the Titans, armchair GM here, made the decision to trade down with Denver. So I firmly believe that the first 6 picks are going to be quarterback, wide receiver, wide receiver, wide receiver. I don't believe the hype of, what's happening around JJ McCarthy necessarily. I think that he's still going to be a top pick, which is what Denver is choosing to trade up for, by the way. So I do think that there's going to be 4 quarterbacks drafted in the top 10, with JJ being the 4th one, but I'm not necessarily believing the hype of JJ McCarthy to the Commanders at 2, JJ McCarthy, to the Vikings at 4 or something like that. Those things are, I don't think JJ to the Commanders at 2 is a possibility, but the Vikings trading up ahead of the Titans to 4 or 5 with the Chargers potentially, I think could happen here. However, my analysis on the JJ McCarthy situation is that the amount of compensation that it would take for a team to trade up to number 4, for example, or even number 3, because the Patriots have said, we're open for business, which whatever that means. I think if the compensation is significant enough, then the Patriots would be happy to trade down and someone could jump up and get Jaden Daniels or Drake May. I believe it's going to be Drake May, number 2 overall. So the way I see the top 6 picks, this is just my opinion, is I think that it goes Caleb Williams to the Bears at number 1, Drake May to the Commanders at 2. I think that the Patriots either stay and take Jaden Daniels at 3, or they trade with the Vikings at 3 and they send them a handful of picks. They go up and they take Jaden Daniels at 3 overall. Then I believe that the Cardinals stay at 4 and take Marvin Harrison Jr. I think the Chargers stay at 5 and take Malik Neighbors. And then I think the Giants take Rome Odunze at number 6. And then that leaves the Titans sitting there with Joe Alt available, Olu Fashanu obviously available, and then, the top edge, Dallas Turner available, so on, right? But then that also leaves JJ McCarthy available. So at this point, I think what happens in my scenario is that the Denver Broncos see JJ McCarthy is available at 7. They know that the Raiders are potentially in play for a quarterback. They know that there's a couple of other teams who might be eyeing a JJ McCarthy that would be interested in him, maybe sitting him for a while or whatever. But it's clear that the Vikings, the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Broncos are all in on a potential quarterback here at the top of those drafts. I think there's a strong chance that the Vikings could send, a number of picks. What's interesting, let's talk about this. What's interesting is that last year, the Arizona Cardinals ended up trading out of the 3rd overall pick. They went from 3 to 12, and then I believe they acquired a 2 of the following draft. They acquired the 33rd pick as well, and then I want to say a 4th round pick. So the compensation for that trade was obviously pretty reasonable. But at that time, the top 2 quarterbacks in that scenario were taken, right? Like, you still had Anthony Richardson, you still had Will Levis, which was understandable, but they were trading with the team that had already drafted their quarterback. So could that have maybe made the compensation a little bit less in that regard? Potentially. But regardless, you can kind of use that as a measuring stick to see what it would cost the Vikings, who are sitting at 11, to jump up to number 3 with the Patriots, who are sitting at 3 and then would have one of these premier top 3 quarterbacks available. Now, here's the difference. The difference is that when the Cardinals traded from 3 to 12, they were not trading away a pick that was their franchise quarterback. And that is where the difference lies, and why the cost to move into 3 is going to be far greater than what the Cardinals got moving from 3 to 12 when trading with the Houston Texans. So my big thing on moving into that spot, if it's the Vikings, it's going to cost them the 11th overall pick. It's going to cost them the 23rd overall pick. It's likely going to cost their 4th round pick, and it's likely going to cost their 1st round pick next year at a minimum. Now, I think the Vikings have an extra pick in the early rounds next year that they got. I think trading somebody, I'm forgetting off the top of my head, but regardless, they think they have a extra second or extra 3rd round pick, something like that next year. So they have a little bit of wiggle room, I guess, but it's going to be a minimum of 3 first round picks for the Vikings to move into the number 3 overall spot, and they get their guy, which is why there is some consideration that that trade potentially doesn't happen. The Patriots just stick and pick their guy, which I think they need to do. But, if the Vikings are willing to send the house, then you take it. But if that happens, then I think the Vikings it's very possible they move into 4 with the Arizona Cardinals, who don't necessarily have to have their quarterback of the future. They have the luxury of just taking the best player available. Now, the reason why in this scenario I don't think that happens is because Marvin Harrison Jr. is a gold jacket kid. He's as sure of a talent at wide receiver since we've seen Calvin Johnson coming out of the draft. It's been a long time since we've seen that for sure of a talent. Like, maybe you could argue Jamar Chase, but Marvin Harrison, a more complete game, a very different receiver as well. So for the Cardinals to pass up on that, I don't think it makes a ton of sense. Now let's move on to the Chargers at 5 really quickly, and then we can continue on. But this is an important part of diagnosing why the Titans trade down in this scenario. The Titans obviously want to strongly consider trading down anyway, like before anything happens. But given this board, this is why they do it and why they pass on Joe Alt. So those 3 receivers, in my opinion, are far and away, like, just way talented. They're 1A, 1B, 1C to me, all 3 of those guys, which is why I think they go boom, boom, boom. Whether it's some team trading into the top 6 and taking those players, they know, like the Titans have been sending smokescreen messages this entire offseason saying, like, oh, we prefer the player who scores touchdowns, and we have Brian Callahan, who was a part of the team that drafted Jamar Chase over Penei Sewell. So there's a lot of things, the Rand Carthon and multiple pressers saying, oh, there's a ton of talent on the offensive line. There's a lot of things pointing to the Titans being interested in taking a receiver at 7 if one falls. So I think there's a good chance that a team like the Steelers, there's a good chance that a team like the Buffalo Bills, like a team that's potentially even the Colts, there's a good chance that one of these teams who are hurting for a stud receiver that would say, hey, Tennessee might take a receiver. We need to jump in front of them. And so maybe the Chargers, maybe the Giants are interested, the Cardinals potentially. If someone's willing to give up enough draft capital, then, I think that there could be a trade. But regardless, if it's Indy that trades up, if it's Buffalo who trades up, whoever, if it's the Steelers, if one of those teams trade up in front of Tennessee, they're taking the receiver most likely, or potentially Joe Alt. So my point is, the way that this thing is going to shake out is going to leave the Titans looking at potentially Rome Odunze or Joe Alt as the top talent at 7. Obviously, you have Olu Fashanu, you have Brock Bowers, you have a couple of other guys who will be in consideration at that pick. But I think that what it's going to take is a slide from J.J. McCarthy. Because if J.J. McCarthy doesn't slide, then there's not necessarily a player that someone is willing to trade up for. Potentially one of the teams I just named for wide receiver. So the other consideration was saying if a Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors slides, obviously you strongly consider taking them. I love the receiver, and I would probably pull the trigger on taking the receiver if it were me. But someone like the Steelers, who have, a considerable need at wide receiver on the opposite side of George Pickens, they just added Russell Wilson. They're in a position where they probably want to contend and go compete right away. So maybe they trade up for a guy. And maybe if a guy like Rome Odunze or Neighbors is there at 7, the Titans would be the perfect trade partner because the Steelers have some pretty decent trade capital. Could add another second-round pick, could go back to 20, and then it turns into the draft of, okay, we have to take our lineman. We have to take our tackle in the first round wherever we land. And I think that's kind of what the Titans are thinking. I think the Titans' strategy going into this draft, into the first round, is all about what happens in the first 6 picks. If J.J. McCarthy falls and there's a trade partner, then I think they're strongly considering trading back, and then they take their tackle no matter where they land. If they trade back and they land at 12, then maybe they can land Olu and he slips. If they trade back with the Steelers and they go to 20, then they're probably looking at Amarius Mims or J.C. Latham or Troy Fautanu, one of those guys, right? And if they trade back even further with Buffalo for some reason, and maybe it's just too good of a package to pass up, and they go to pick 28, then they're probably evaluating like a Tyler Guyton or, Rose Garden or, Kingsley Suamatia. One of those guys, they're going to be looking at tackle most likely if they're adding draft picks, because if you're adding capital in the top 100 in the second and third rounds, then you're going to be in play for some pretty good receivers at that point too. So that's the logic. So what happens here to wrap things up in the first round is that the Tennessee Titans trade the 7th overall pick and a 7th round pick for the 12th overall pick, Denver's 3rd overall, which is pick 76, Denver's 4th round pick, which is pick 121, I believe, and then a 3rd round pick next year in 2025 to fill the gap in the trade that they sent for L'Jarius Sneed. So and then you land Olu Fashanu. So talking about Olu really quickly, Olu to me is kind of the 1B to Joe Alt's 1A, but for different reasons. I really like Fashanu's flexibility. I like his athleticism a little bit more than Joe Alt because he's a little bit lower to the ground, right? He's not quite as tall. Joe Alt kind of, with that height, there's a little bit of a concern of, are those speed to power rushers in the NFL that are, 6'2", 6'3" type of thing? Are they going to get into his chest and really disrupt him that way? I think Joe Alt is great. And I think if they stick and pick at 7 and then they only have pick 38 and then the 4th round pick after, we don't add any capital, that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Joe Alt is plug and play. He would be fantastic. I'm not complaining about that. But what I am saying here is that I think this is the best case scenario where the Titans end up trading down. They stay close to the top 10 where they can still land Olu Fashanu, which to me is just as good, and you could even say maybe better, maybe a higher upside in terms of where the ceiling could go for Olu versus Joe Alt, where it's like Joe Alt is already kind of close to that ceiling, which is fantastic. But again, is the drop off enough to where I shouldn't add a 3rd round pick next year, a 3rd round pick this year, which I don't have, and another 4th round pick in a draft that has some pretty good talent around the 100 to 125, 130 slots. So to me, this is a no-brainer. So the Titans move back. They take Olu Fashanu at 12, and we're ecstatic. Some people would be fine with Olu at 7th overall. If they took Olu at 7th overall, I wouldn't hate it. I wouldn't be pissed. I would be like, maybe could we trade him down? Possibly. But worst case scenario, like, that's fine. So in this case, they trade down because the Broncos see J.J. McCarthy available at 7, and they just want to go up and get their guy. They don't want to risk the Raiders taking him. They don't want to risk somebody else, whatever. So that's where we're at. Now going on to the second round pick, moving through the first round to pick 38, I have a edge player, one of my favorite edge players in this draft, Darius Robinson, who is an absolute menace. This guy has crazy versatility, and he's kind of being talked about as a guy who can literally play, like, if there's a technique on the defensive line, he can play it 1 through 5, right? So to me, I really like this pick. You could have gone receiver here, and that again wouldn't be upset with that at all. I mean, there's great players here. I think Ladd McConkey is like the player who's kind of at the top of the board at 38. There's a good chance he could even get taken from there. Jalen Polk, I don't mind at 38. And there's a handful of other guys who could maybe slide that would be just absolute studs here. Like Keon Coleman could potentially slide to 38. I wouldn't hate that. So there's some options there, but to me, you address a really important need with a really talented player. Don't get me wrong. There's a good chance that Darius Robinson is not available at pick 38. There's a very good chance. And then maybe you go like Chris Broswell or maybe one of the other edge options, or maybe if those guys are not there, then you're like, okay, the ship has kind of sailed on edge. Like we kind of have to go the wide receiver route. Like those are of course options there too. So, but I really love Darius Robinson. I think it makes a ton of sense. Now, going into the third round pick, which is pick 76 that we got from Denver. This one's interesting because this one kind of changed the trajectory of the draft. I was planning to go receiver here. There's a guy I really like that played at UCF, Javon Baker. I think he's this year's George Pickens in terms of talent. He's kind of abrasive. He's kind of like not everybody's cup of tea, but I think he's got crazy, crazy talent. So at 76, that would be a great pickup. Roman Wilson potentially makes a ton of sense. So I was looking receiver at third, I'm not going to lie. Or potentially linebacker. I almost went Junior Colson. I did not go Junior Colson here because the Chargers have a ton of picks in the top 100. I think that Junior Colson is a Charger. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they used like they have like pick 51 and I think like 60 something. If they used one of those picks to take him, I wouldn't be super surprised. And then I don't suspect that the top 3 linebackers in this class are going to be available at 76. We could have gone Jermaine Trotter. We could have gone Trotter here. We could have gone a couple of other routes that were good players. However, the big body T'Vondre Sweat slides to 76. Now, if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't think he's available at 76. I think T'Vondre Sweat, with the issues that he just had off the field, I don't think it matters. I think those issues are, don't get me wrong, the issues are serious, but I don't think it changes where teams are going to potentially draft him. I don't think it's going to be looked at as that severe of a issue. Maybe it turns a couple teams off and they go a different route in the second round, but I think there's not a very strong chance that he makes it past like pick like 55 to 60. And the reason why I say that is there's a lot of really good defensive tackles in this draft, but to me there's a clear top 3, and T'Vondre Sweat is third in my opinion. So there's a lot of teams that need depth and need starters at defensive tackle, and I think that he's going to get nabbed up before this. But in my mock draft, he slid, and I've seen him slide in some predictions as well. So I don't think it's crazy to assume that T'Vondre Sweat could potentially be there at pick 76. In this scenario where we trade and add a third round pick, we're able to pick him up. So you add Darius Robinson, you add T'Vondre Sweat to the defensive line. And so to me, the issues of losing Denico Autry and any of that, you wipe those away. Don't get me wrong, Denico is a dog, and I hate that he's gone. Big fan of Denico Autry. But he's aging. He's going to be 34, I think, this year. You replace him with the guy who has similar versatility. Denico, you could line him up everywhere, inside, outside, doesn't matter. Darius Robinson can do that. And if you want to move Darius to the outside on a certain package and you plug to, T'Vondre Sweat, all of a sudden you have T'Vondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons in the middle there. We're looking dangerous on defense. So I really love this. Even though I think the offense needs a ton of help, I really love this move. So going into the fourth round, we have a guy who I've been high on this entire draft process. Again, I'm not confident that he makes it in this case. This is Tennessee's fourth round pick. So to pick 106, I'm not super confident he makes it to pick 106. I'm going to be honest. I think the top couple tiers of receivers are going to get drafted early. I think receivers are going to go early in the entire draft for all these teams, which might make some of those talented players like T'Vondre Sweat, for example, slide a little farther than they should. But Malik Washington, an absolute dog. The biggest knock on Malik is that he's 5'8.5", so he's really small. But he's built like a muscle mouse. He's really, really strong. I think he had like 18 reps on the bench at the combine, which is better than quite a few of the guys who would be perceived as stronger than him. So he did really well there. And he's a production machine. This guy, the thing that's most exciting to me about this guy is that when he's one-on-one, he wins. He does not lose one-on-one reps, and it doesn't matter what route he's running either. I think he was like top 3 in FBS in like total like win rate when it's like in man coverage. So just not only that, I mean, he did it at a very high scale. 110 catches. I think it was like 1,400 something yards this past year. I forget the number of touchdowns. I think it was like 8 or 9 or something like that. But regardless, crazy production from this kid in a very competitive, good ACC, in my opinion. Better than what it's been in the past, maybe. And so, yeah, I think he's crazy talented. And at pick 106, it's like, if you've landed him, then you're in good shape. Now, if Malik is not there and Javon Baker is potentially there, I would really love Baker. I like both of those players. I would love to have them both, but if I had to choose one, I'd probably slightly go Javon Baker. But I don't think that Malik Washington's size is going to necessarily hurt him. There's been really small receivers in the past that have done well, though it's a small sample size. He has that type of potential. So if Javon Baker's not there, would love Malik Washington. If Malik Washington is not there, I am okay with taking a flyer on like a Brendan Rice, maybe waiting around, or maybe you take, the player I have next there, and then you wait a little bit longer and you take somebody else, like maybe Luke McCaffrey or something later. But all 3 of those guys would be good spots to me to fill some good depth at wide receiver. Next pick, this one is via Denver, pick 121 that we got in this year's trade. Malik Mustafa. I don't know a tremendous amount about Malik Mustafa. I haven't watched a lot of his games, but what I have watched is I've watched this guy work out, which he did very impressively. And I watched some tape, watched a couple games, and this guy is a firecracker in the backfield. He is every bit of your like hybrid, super aggressive, in your face, will get downhill and lay a crazy tackle. And he's got pretty decent coverage skills too. So I really like Malik Mustafa. He didn't get on my radar late until I think it was Teron Davenport that shared something from him. Some of his workouts, and then I kind of looked into him, and as a later round option to add safety depth, I mean, he's fantastic, and I think he will most likely be there at 121, and I feel pretty good about that, so really love that depth. 5th round pick, Tommy Eichenberg. Admittedly, not a huge fan of Tommy Eichenberg because I think his game is kind of one-sided. I don't really love his coverage ability necessarily, but I do think he's a very smart player. His teammates respected him. I think he was a captain 2 of the 3 years. Really good production just in terms of just plugging the gap and going after the guy with the ball. He did a really good job of that. So I think we kind of already have that in Kenneth Murray. He's not nearly as explosive as Kenneth Murray is, but I do think that he has a good knack for finding the ball. And in the 5th round, after you've kind of passed on, like we're at pick 121, the top linebackers were gone. Another guy to consider here is Cedric Gray. So, for example, if Malik Mustafa is not there at 121, then maybe you go Cedric Gray at 121. Maybe you even consider Cedric Gray at 106. I'm pretty high on Cedric Gray. There's a couple of guys. Jordan McGee is another guy who I would consider at pick. I think Tommy Eichenberg is pick 146. So maybe you consider him at 146. We'll see. But I think he's solid depth at that. He's just a good player at that pick. 6th round, I went with cornerback Jarvis Brownlee, which is a guy who had a very early 30 visit to the Titans and played pretty well. He has good size. Like what he did this past season, was fairly productive, and he's got fire to him. I think he has some versatility as well. So you might be able to move him around a little bit. And I think he's just good depth at that point in the draft. And it's most likely that the Titans are high on him too. There's another guy that I love potentially in this spot. If Jarvis is gone, which is a really good chance that he's gone, he doesn't make it to pick 186 or whatever this is. if he's gone, another guy I like that could potentially be in this range is Elijah Jones from Boston College. Another guy who I'm just a really big fan of, had really great tape. I think that he just provides really good value at that point in the draft. And so if Jarvis is not there, Elijah would be a really good pick. And then going into the 7th round, I struggled with the 7th round pick because this one's late. This is like 252 because we sent our earlier pick to Denver in the trade. So I went with Tanner McLaughlin. There's a good chance that Tanner McLaughlin is not there at 252. There's also a good chance that he doesn't get drafted at all. So we're just going to split the difference and say that the Titans can get him in the 7th round. Trey Knox is another guy who has been highlighted as, pretty solid value, who definitely will be there at pick 252 in my opinion. Again, just kind of adding depth to the tight end room. Brian Callahan made it very clear that that was important to him. And there's a couple of guys that I really like that you could get in the later round, 6th round, 7th round, and potentially even undrafted. So I think there's enough talent there where you can just kind of add it to the room and say, okay, like let's get a little bit of competition going. I considered running back, a couple of running backs here in this position, but a couple of the guys that I really liked did not fall to this pick. So the fact that we traded the earlier 7th round pick kind of messed things up a little bit. Rasheen Ali is a guy out of Marshall that I think has a lot of potential, plays with a ton of heart, kind of got highlighted a little bit in the Titans offseason from some of the coaches and scouting staff and analysis that was really strong for him. So that's a possibility as well, because I think there's a chance he'll be there at 252. But I went with Tanner McLaughlin. I went with a tight end, and if Tanner is there at 252, then I think that's a heck of a 7th round pick. Maybe he comes in, he adds some stability as like your tight end 3 potentially, though I think it's going to be Thomas Odukoye because I love Thomas Odukoye. But anyways, that's what we got. So that is my full 7th round mock draft with all of the fixins, all of the explanations. Again, who knows? Who knows what this thing is going to be? That, again, is the exciting part of the NFL draft. That's what gets me pumped for this year's draft. My birthday falls on draft weekend as well. My birthday is on the 26th. So every single year, the draft falls on my birthday, whether it's day 1 or day 2. It's been day 2 for the past several years. But regardless, my favorite time of the year is here. I'm super pumped about it. So, guys, let me know what you think about the mock draft. Tell me, if you're a Titans fan, let me know in the comments if you're happy with how these picks go. Personally, if this is the Titans draft come Thursday, we're twerking on Broadway, okay? Buddies, sisters, and brothers. We're twerking down Broadway because this would quite literally put the Titans back in contention for the AFC. So they can't stick us at the bottom anymore if this happens. This plugs virtually every hole that the Titans have, with maybe the existing, starting safety situation, and the linebacker situation isn't great. But other than that, my goodness, adding some serious depth and plugging some serious holes on in the trenches. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Drop me a like if you wouldn't mind. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe. I got some more videos coming. Like I said, full 1st round mock. I'm going to do this, but for the 1st round for every single team. I'm feeling really confident about it. I really like it. I'm going to include trades, so it's going to be fun and exciting and crazy. So make sure you keep your eyes out for that. But until that next one, I appreciate you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your day and have a good one.